IVM.
Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of the Musafir Stories, India's very own travel podcast, where each week we share the journey of travelers in their own words and relive their experiences with you, our listeners.
Hey guys, welcome to a brand new episode on the Musafir Stories podcast. We'd like to wish you a belated Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. 2020 has been a tough year for a lot of us, but it is time to give ourselves a pat on the back for seeing this through. We'd like to thank all our guests and listeners for the continued love and support throughout the year. Remember that this pandemic is still not over. So while we look forward to traveling in the new year, be sure to social distance and take all necessary precautions. Before we get on with today's episode, a quick announcement on our giveaway from last week's episode. And the winners are Jashim Jamaludheen and Lushma Rathore. Congratulations guys, and we will reach out to you shortly with more details. As for today's episode, we talked to Dr. Jono Lineen about his remarkable travel memoir of his journey across the Western Himalayas. Make sure to listen to the episode and answer 3 simple questions linked in the show notes to stand a chance to win a copy of Jono's book. Good luck and on with today's episode. So with that introduction, we'd love to welcome Dr. Jono Lineen on the Musafir Stories. Jono, thank you so much for being a part of the podcast and welcome.
Oh, Saif, it's great to be with you.
Thank you, Jono. And a lot of times we use multi-talented or a man of many talents very loosely, but this time it's truly the case because Jono has been a forester, a mountain guide, a ski racer, an author, and currently curator at the National Museum of Australia. Jono, how do you manage to wear so many hats? I mean, how did you manage all of this?
Well, maybe the secret to having that type of a life, Saif, is not to have kids and not to get a mortgage too early on in life. It gives you a lot more time and a lot more freedom. Now I'm a dad and I'm married and I have, a complex job. And so that type of freedom that I had in my 20s and 30s isn't there anymore. I mean, my energy is directed into different areas, but I was extremely fortunate to have that freedom. And a lot of that freedom was the fact that I wasn't in debt and I was, a young guy, free and easy. So I was extremely fortunate.
That's brilliant. And remember, you're telling this to somebody from India. Before we take up our first job and turn 22, 23, our parents are already behind our backs to get us married right away. So maybe that's the reason why.
Yeah, I think that is a big difference, say, for sure. Yeah, my parents were very encouraging. I started out as an international ski racer, and they were very encouraging of that. And out of that came a particular series of jobs that meant that, as you said, I was a forester. But as a forester in Canada, I only worked for particular seasons. So I'd only work for 6 months of the year, and I had 6 months off. And so for a lot of that time, I was actually ski racing full time, or I was living in the Himalayas. So that also gave me a lot of freedom.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And yeah, I think a good segue of sorts also. I know we were really early in the conversation, but the Himalayas, right? That's what we're here to talk about. Your book, Into the Heart of the Himalayas, right? I know the book itself, I've spent the past few days reading the book. It's a great travelogue of sorts, but just giving our listeners who might not have a background about it, just the circumstances leading up to this book as well, Jono, would you like to outline that as well for us?
Yeah, sure. So how did I end up in the Himalayas? I would say that there was really two catalysts. The first catalyst was a tragic story. My younger brother Gareth was a rower, a competitive rower with the University of Victoria in Canada, and him and his team were out training one evening, and a huge storm came up out of the Pacific. They were training on a small lake. It was only about 2 kilometers long by 1 kilometer wide, but there was 6-foot waves on the lake. It was Canada in winter, so the water was extremely cold, probably only 2 or 3 degrees, and the storm actually snapped their racing rowing shell in two, and the boys were in the water, and unfortunately Gareth died of hypothermia. And that was, that was one of the real low points of my life. And at the same time as that, I was training for the Olympics, and, that completely disrupted my training and really kind of, in a lot of ways, destroyed my Olympic dream. And that kind of led me into a downward spiral, 2 years of really, booze and drugs and failed relationships. And, it was almost a hopeless situation for me. I lost faith in the future, because when somebody so close to you dies so young, he was only 18 years old, it makes you question what the future can hold for you in a positive sense. It made me question, the family and the community around me, and it also made me question myself. Was I, what was the point in me being here? And at the bottom of that spiral, I kind of came back to a dream that I'd had from childhood, in a way, because when we were kids, I grew up in Belfast in Northern Ireland during the Troubles there, during the Civil War. And when we were kids, my mum used to take us down to the library every Saturday morning. We would walk down there, and we would get our books for the week, our library books, and I would usually choose a couple of kids' mystery stories, like the Hardy Boys or something like that. And then I was drawn to the mountaineering section of the library. And this is back in the 1970s. And in those days, those books used to have color photo inserts. And I remember I would always open up those books, and there would be those color pictures of men and women climbing in the Himalayas, and they would be up above the clouds in these bright colored down jackets, and behind them there would just be a sea of peaks flowing on, and the sky would be this incredibly deep blue, not a cloud there. And that was completely different to the situation that I was in Belfast, because Belfast is a very grey city. It's an old industrial city. And during that time, the army was on the streets, so they were wearing khaki grey. The buildings are always grey. There's rains there all the time, so it was just completely grey. And then here were these images of people in a place above the clouds, reaching for the heavens, literally and figuratively. And that memory kind of lodged in my mind. And when I hit the bottom of that downward spiral, that image came back to me, and I decided that was the place that I wanted to go. And so I saved up my money from working in forestry, and I bought a ticket to Delhi, got to Delhi, jumped on a bus, and made my way up to Leh Ladakh, and that place did not disappoint, I'll tell you. It is a place of incredible light, of incredibly friendly people. It's an environment of compassion. And I went there for one season of trekking, and I ended up spending 8 years in the Himalayas. So that's how I ended up in the Himalayas.
I think that's a profound story as well. Even the circumstances leading up to it. Even you were, I think, just barely out of your teens and just a young boy at that time, right? So I think it is but natural for someone to go through that downward spiral of sorts because of the situation in itself, how it was. But it's kind of also endearing how you kind of came out of it, and how the mountains drew you there, and how you ended up in the Himalayas, right? Literally across, halfway across the globe. Let's talk a little bit more about how the journey happened, right? The journey that you've covered in the book. You've covered not just the Himalayan part of India, but also other countries, and especially places like Pakistan that's not as explored as one would say by international mountaineers as they do explore the Indian part of the Himalayas, right? So how did that happen?
Well, when I decided to take on that walk, I'd been living in the Himalayas for a few years at that point, and I spoke quite a bit of Hindi, so I was very comfortable in the mountains. I spoke a bit of Tibetan also, and I had some fascination with northern Pakistan, with the Himalayas, the very western edge of it, because that is, one of the mountaineering high points of the world, with K2 and Broad Peak, and so I wanted to go there, and it's interesting to think about the motivation for this walk, because the motivation for the walk really was, as I mentioned earlier, I read a lot of those mountaineering books, and those people like Doug Scott and Dougal Haston, great climbers from the 70s and 80s, Reinhold Messner. I mean, these people were heroes for me, and I was a young guy in great shape from all of the ski racing that I had done, and I was an extremely strong walker, confident in the mountains, and so I thought, well, I love this place. I love the people here. And there's so much culture here also. There's the Islamic side, there's the Buddhist side, there's the Hindu side. So what can I do to kind of bring that incredibly compassionate and positive energy that the people have here into my own life? And I thought a good way to do that would be to connect those three portions of the Himalayas in one long, uninterrupted walk. And on top of that, being a young guy with lots of ego, I thought that would be also, a great thing to become the first person to do that, the first person to walk the length of the Western Himalayas alone. And so that's why I decided to start in Pakistan.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And yeah, just to throw some numbers out there, this was covered over a period of 4 months, all by walk, and a distance of about 2,700 kilometers. So it's no mean feat, like I'd say, right?
Yeah. I when I think about it now, Saif, I'm blown away, because I'm pretty sure I could probably still do that walk, but it would probably take me a year now, I think. Because I was walking, 30 or 40 kilometers a day, every day, with 25 kilo pack, at, an average altitude of probably 4,000 meters. So it was a huge undertaking. And the physical aspect of it didn't bother me at all. I had no doubt that I would be able to do it. What was more interesting was probably the psychological aspect, because especially when I went to Pakistan, it was the first time that I had been there. When you spend a lot of time in India, of course, the image of Pakistan isn't that great. And so, I started in Pakistan, and the first couple of days there, it was worrisome. I was in the area close to the Kashmir border, along the line of control, and there's a lot of military there, and a lot of military around can make you nervous. So there was as much a psychological challenge in this as a physical challenge.
Absolutely. And just going back to that point, right? Because you had been, at that point, you had been in India, you'd spent some time in India. So there was that image of Pakistan that had been built up. and especially even in the region that you kind of started this off, right? The Gilgit-Baltistan part of Pakistan, it has its own troubles. How was the ground situation? Like, how were your interactions with people as you started this work, and the people you would run into, and just in terms of security, right? Even like I said, living in India, we have a certain image of Pakistan, which is true to a certain extent, and some of it is also kind of blown a little bit out of proportion. So how did you feel the situation on the ground, and were there any, like, say, concerns, or even in terms of security, right? Just there have been things in the past that have happened, people being abducted and stuff like that. Were any of those playing on your mind?
Yeah, they played on my mind really only for the first couple of days. I remember the first night that I camped. It would have been the second night I camped. The first night I stayed in the village of a store, which was, an incredible start anyway, because one of the first places I visited was a gun shop in a store, and was told by the owner there. The owner was extremely accommodating, lovely man, but he explained to me how important firearms are to, the transition to manhood in northern Pakistan, in Baltistan, which was an interesting opening for me. And he actually offered to sell me a gun at a cut rate price because he was so worried about the fact that I was undertaking this entire walk through the Himalayas without any type of weapon. And for me, that just seemed crazy, because I have completely the opposite idea around weapons. If you approach a person or a community and you're armed, they're immediately going to be standoffish and concerned about it. Whereas my experience right across the Himalaya was that I would show up in a village. I was alone. I was a single guy. I was obviously not from the area. And I was not a threat at all. And what happened immediately, and it didn't matter if it was in Pakistan or Ladakh or Lahore, Spiti, Garhwal, Kumwan, people would approach me within 5 minutes of sitting down on someone's step in the village and offer me a cup of tea. And then after 10 minutes or so, a crowd would be gathering around and they'd be asking me questions. Because in almost all of the villages, somebody speaks English. And like I said, I spoke a lot of Hindi. And within 10 minutes, people were offering me a place to sleep, either in the kitchen or in their shed with the cows or the sheep or whatever. The compassion and generosity of the people right across the Himalayas was one of the standout events of that entire walk, to the point where I say that, I started that walk still really suffering from the grief of Gareth's loss, although I wasn't really cognizant, I wasn't really recognizing that during the walk. I pushed it down so far into my subconscious that it was easy for me to ignore it. But I think it was the compassion and generosity of people right across the Himalayas, their willingness to open up to me and to take me in and treat me like a relative, even though they'd never met me before, that in a lot of ways reinstilled my faith. I said earlier, when Gareth died, I lost a lot of faith in myself, in my community, in the future. And it was the people of the Himalayas who helped reinstill my faith in humanity. So yes, I was nervous those first couple of days in Pakistan, but almost right away, people opened up their houses to me. I was not a threat. And if I'd accepted that weapon from the gun dealer in the store, I'm pretty sure that the situation would have been completely different.
Yeah, I think so. I think it was a wise decision. That's all I would say.
Yeah. And I wouldn't have been able to get that weapon across the border anyway, safe.
Yeah, definitely. But just in terms of the journey itself, right? How did you kind of chart out the path? Because this is, again, back in the 90s. And I mean, even now, it's not that easy in the mountains. Even with a phone, it's hard to get along just because you don't have signal and everything. How did you chart out that path you plan to take?
Yeah, that's a good question, Saif, because, of course, this was in the days back before smartphones and easily accessible GPS. So, and of course, it's all along that border area. Pakistan, India, Tibet, a hotly contested area. So I couldn't access any Indian government maps because those aren't issued. But interestingly, you can get topographical maps for that entire area through the U.S. Army. And so I could actually buy those maps. And of course, I couldn't do that online back in those days, but I ordered those maps through a map seller in America. And I probably had, it was at least 20 maps. And what I basically did was I just lined them all up on the floor, spread them out, and I kind of traced a route along there using the knowledge that I already had because I'd been walking a lot, especially in Ladakh and in Himachal and a bit in Garhwal. And then other areas I was able to use available guidebooks from back in those days, especially up in northern Pakistan and in Kumaon and other areas of Garhwal and Himachal that I hadn't been to before. And I was able to trace out an entire route and, get some idea how long it was going to take logistically, where I'd be able to, be in villages, where I'd be able to stock up on more supplies. And then, I brought all those maps along with me. And I'm a very good map reader. I've been very competitive in orienteering, which is the sport that involves running and map reading. So I was always pretty confident about where I was and where I was going.
It's just remarkable. That's all I could say, because I am pretty bad with my orientation. I get lost easily, even in a city that has every intersection marked. I get lost easily. So hats off to you, Jono, for
it might be a difficult walk for you then. So.
I know.
And even these days, with GPS, because I go back to Ladakh every few years, it's not guaranteed that GPS is going to be accurate. So, you need to have a pretty good sense of direction.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, really, really remarkable, and especially doing it just with paper maps and such a terrain, and in a place where, you did speak a little bit of Hindi, but again, language is somewhat of a little bit of a handicap, I would say. It's just remarkable is all I have to say. And again, this is back in the 90s, right? It's not even now. I think now there is a chance that you might run into a lot more people just because everything in terms of the infrastructure to tourism, all of that has picked up a little bit. But back in the day, really remarkable achievement, I'd say. And just another thing that I found interesting also was this transition you were making from what you're calling the Muslim part to the Buddhist part, or the Indian side, right? Basically, how just to kind of get over a distance of about 60 kilometers, right? Because I think you start your journey in India from Kargil. It was just kind of funny in one way that how much you had to go around, right, to get back to that point.
that was crazy, Saif, because I started at the intersection of the Indus and Astor rivers, close to Gilgit, and then I went up over the Deosai Plateau, down to Skardu, and then followed the Shayok River to Kapalu. And Kapalu is only about 25 kilometers from the line of control. But of course, I couldn't go any farther at that point. And so I had to take buses and trains all the way back down to Lahore, across to Delhi, and in Delhi I had to fly back up to Leh, and in Leh I had to get another bus and take that bus up to Kargil, so which is only, as you said, 50 or 60 kilometers from Kargil and Kapalu. But I mean, I think it was over 1,500 kilometers to get back to that point and start all over again.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was an interesting one, and I was so happy to get walking again because walking is what us humans are made to do. There's so much comfort in walking, actually.
Yeah, yeah. It was just reminiscent. Obviously, it's nothing close to the same thing, and the things that you've gone through in reality. But there was a movie that came out not long ago, a Bollywood movie. I don't know if you had a. You should probably check it out if you haven't. But it's called Bajrangi Bhaijaan, and the lead actor does that same thing where a girl from Pakistan is actually lost and she's on the Indian side. She loses her way and gets on the Indian side, and he makes that long journey to get her back to Pakistan, and how he goes through a lot of twists and turns and difficulties and challenges.
Oh,
and a few
I
funny...
will check that out. That sounds interesting.
Yeah, it is. I'll probably send you the link and the name of the movie, but it's pretty funny. Of course, not nothing close to the reality that you went through, but
the reality, the reality would be a bit different, I think.
Oh yeah, but it's just funny, and I think something you should definitely check out. But yeah,
and it's great that he did it for love.
I know, right? It was somebody who wasn't even related to him, but he just does it so she could be reunited with her parents. Yeah, Jonah, I was actually going to ask you how you felt the transition was, right? Both in terms of the Himalayas as well as the people, right? When you moved from what you're calling the Pakistan part of it, or the Muslim Himalayas, to the Buddhist and the Hindu side of the Himalayas, what kind of a transition did you feel, both in terms of the terrain, if any, and also in terms of the people?
Well, if we look at the transition from the Muslim Himalayas to the Buddhist Himalayas, so from Pakistan across into Ladakh, as I said, I mean, the people on both sides of that border were incredibly compassionate and generous. Of course, there'd been a very, very long relationship between Baltistan and Ladakh before partition. So, culturally, although they were religiously different, culturally there was a lot of similarities between the two areas. What I probably noticed most when I transitioned across to Ladakh was that in Pakistan, I never interacted or spoke to any women. It was always men who interacted with me. Whereas when I went to Ladakh, to the Buddhist side, Buddhist women are much more open and engaging and willing to talk to you as you're walking through their fields. So that was a bit of a surprise and something that I appreciated. I mean, a personal opinion of my own is that I just find the Ladakhi people and the Laholis and Spitiites to be the most generous people that I've ever come across. That's, I think, one of the reasons why I spent 8 years on and off in that area, is because the people are so beautiful, so open and accommodating. And then when I made the transition from Lahore across into Garawal, what was interesting there was, I was moving from the northern side of the Himalayas to the southern side, and so geographically and meteorologically, there's a huge difference between the two, because the northern side of the Himalayas, of course, doesn't have the monsoon. It's much, much drier. It's generally higher than the southern side. And then making that transition across into Garawal, everything is so much greener. It's just teeming with life. And then, almost as soon as you drop into Garawal, you're into that Chardham Yatra area, which is just, it is a path that is inundated with religion and spirits and magic. So I think that Chardham Yatra area is one of the most vibrant and vital areas that I've ever been to in mountains anywhere in the world. And I was there, much later on in the year. Saif, I was there in October and November. So pilgrimage season had pretty well finished. So there was very few people around. But still you could feel that the energy of the incredible history that's been concentrated into that area between, Yamnotri, Gangotri, Kedarnath and Badrinath. That is just an area that is pulsing with energy. So the three areas were very different in a lot of ways. But again, all of them were extremely accommodating, and all of them really opened me up to completely different ways of thinking, which is a lot of what I wanted to accomplish on that walk.
Yeah, absolutely. And also one question that I'd been keen to ask you, Jono, because it's not even like hitchhiking, right? I've had people previously on the podcast who have hitchhiked, but walking, right? It's a little bit of a lonely journey also, right? That way, sure, you would run into like villagers or people every now and again when you have to make a stop, but for large portions of your journey it would just be lonely, right? So what was going on in your mind while you did this, like took this undertaking, just walking for most part of the day?
Oh, well, what was going on in my mind, Saif, was magic. And magic happened every day on that walk. And I think that a lot of it had to do with the fact that I was alone, and I was walking. And everybody listening to the podcast will have had the situation, whether they've been trekking in the Himalayas or walking around one of the parks in Delhi, where you go for a long walk and the way that you think starts to change. This is actually what I did my PhD on, was the relationship between walking and creativity and storytelling. And a lot of what this book is about is those three things. So, and actually this book was a catalyst for me to move into that area of research. So when we go for a walk, our minds change neurologically, neuroelectrically, neurotransmitters all change while we walk, and we become more open to what's going on around us. And so, people say, well, weren't you lonely? And, honestly, I wasn't, because every once in a while, probably about every third day or so on average, I would stop in a village, stay in a village, and people would take me in. And although the conversation was limited, there was that beautiful interaction with people who had no expectations about what the other was going to give or take. And during the day when I was walking, I was alone with my thoughts. And the other incredible thing is that this walk gave me so much time to think about my brother Gareth, and what he meant to me and what his passing actually meant for me and for my future. And I frequently described the walk as actually being a very long darshan with Gareth. I was able to view him in all kinds of different ways, consciously and subconsciously. And, as when you have darshan with a priest, or with a piece of sacred landscape or an incredible statue, being able to view him in all of these different lights made me much more acceptant of what had happened and what the future would hold. So walking alone was actually one of the real pieces of magic of this entire walk.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Really, really profound. And I really love the way that you have actually weaved this as well in your journey, right? Because this was an integral part of the journey itself. Gareth, right? Gareth and his passing and his memories, they were an integral part of the journey, an integral part of you. And it clearly shows in the book as well. That's a portion of the book that I really, really loved and appreciated. But as you kind of continued through this journey, through the Indian side of the Himalayas. Like, what had you planned? Like, what was on your mind? Where was this journey leading into, and where would you plan to finish this?
Well, the plan, the superficial or conscious plan behind it was to, again, immerse myself in these three different cultures and religions and, try and create some kind of, almost an anthropological text around the walk. In Garhwal and Kumwan, what I wanted to do, I wanted to complete the Char Dham Yatra and then go across Kumwan to the Mahakali River, which is the border between India and Nepal, and that's where I planned to finish the trek. Because the Mahakali is an incredible river because it comes from Mount Kailash, Lake Mansarovar, and then eventually comes into the Ganga. So I thought that was a fitting place to stop. Now, unfortunately, I wasn't able to complete the Char Dham Yatra because I got to Yamunotri, I got to Gangotri, I started up to Kedarnath, and in fact I was probably only about 5 kilometers from Kedarnath when the police came along and told me to turn around. And I said, well, what are you talking about? I thought this was a pilgrimage site. I'm on a pilgrimage. And they said, no, it's too dangerous. And I thought, well, what do you mean it's too dangerous? Oh, it's extremely cold. You'll freeze. And I said, I've just walked from Pakistan. I don't think I'm going to freeze. But anyway, it was the police and they weren't going to listen to anything I had to say. So I had to turn around there. And then when I got to Joshimath and I had to apply to the district commissioner for an exemption to try and get up to Badrinath. I went to the district commissioner's office multiple times over 3 days, I think, and no one could actually tell me where the district commissioner was, which I thought was really interesting. They kept saying he could be in this village or he could be in that village. He might be holding, a court in that particular village. And I said, well, when do you think he will be back? And no one could tell me when he was going to be back. So I decided at that point that, the gods were against me and that maybe Badrinath wasn't on the card. So I just kept walking.
Yeah, some of the things and some of the challenges you are bound to encounter in India, and especially if it's in the 90s,
Yes.
then I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
But that's fascinating. And I think it'd be unfair of me to ask you, because this journey has been so wonderful. I'm sure it's been like sprayed with a number of really memorable and wonderful moments. Anything that stands out, that sticks out for you?
No, that's crazy, Saif. I mean, dozens and dozens of moments stick out for me. But, in hindsight, there's a couple of moments that I think about all the time. And one of them was when I was in Tabo, which is in Spiti, an incredible Buddhist monastery, very close to the Tibetan border. And Tabo is incredible because it's one of the few remaining Tibetan Gompas from the time of the great translator Lotso Rinchen Zampo, who created the Tibetan language. And when he returned to Western Tibet, the king of Western Tibet vowed to create 108 Gompas in the honor of the creation of the language, which is an incredible thing to do. And Tabo, there's only, unfortunately, all of those particular Gompas on the Chinese side in Tibet were destroyed during the Cultural Revolution, but on the Indian side, there's fortunately still 3 of them left. The best known is Tabo. And so Tabo is this place with over 1,000 years of history. And, it's again one of those places that's just so steeped in history and the energy of devotion and faith that it pulses it. You feel it when you go in there. And I remember going into one of the main dukangs with a young monk there, and it was just as the sun was coming up, and we went in and we sat in this very dark chamber, very cool, and on four sides of me were these incredible 1,000-year-old statues, and the walls were covered in frescoes and in statues. And as I sat there very quietly, the sun started to come above the Gompa, and light started to filter in through openings in the roof, and the Gompa started to come to life. And it felt like the statuary in that room was alive. It was, again, pulsing with this energy of compassion. And it was a moment that I'll never forget, because again, it started bringing me back into the idea that faith in the future, faith in humanity, faith in the wisdom of the past is important. It's something that we should hold on to and try and accommodate in our lives, in our modern lives. So that was one of the moments. And then another moment that I come back to again and again was when I reached Galmuk, which, as you know, is the source of the Ganga. And I'd been in Gangotri, and I walked up to Galmuk one day, and I arrived there. I was on my own. There was nobody there. It was in November, so all the pilgrims had left, and so I was alone walking up the glacial moraine, these big rocks that are at the front of a glacier. And as I wanted to reach the source, so I was getting there just as the sun was starting to set. And people who have been to Galmuk know that the glacier is kind of cradled between these two great, immense ice peaks. And then the sky behind was starting to turn those colors that you see as the sun goes down, coral and ruby and copper. And the face of the glacier was a turquoise color. And I remember thinking that, wow, the color of the sky is coral, and the face of the glacier is turquoise. And, those are the protective stones that every Tibetan child receives when they're born, and they wear those stones for the rest of their lives. They're their color of protection. And so I felt like I was moving into this landscape of protection, of security. And so I started running up these rocks. I so much wanted to get to the source of the Ganga before the sun went down. And eventually I got there, and I was covered in sweat. I'd thrown off my backpacks to ensure that I'd get there in time before the sun set. And I remember sitting there on this gray sandy beach right at where Ganga Mai comes out from the base of the glacier, and I just wanted to be there, and try and connect with the beginning of that incredible river and the beginning of an incredible mother energy. And I sat there, and I just felt this energy climbing up my spine. It was this heat, and then all of a sudden, I was crying. I just was overcome with emotion at being at that time, at that place, and that was a really, really important moment in my life, because interestingly, Saif, it took me a very, very long time to write this book. It took me almost 12 years, because, I've talked a lot here today about the fact that so many incredible things happen during this journey. I always say that magic happened every day, and none of that magic was coming across in the actual book, in the draft. So what had gone wrong? What had I missed in the storytelling? And so that set in chain a long process of trying to find what was what was the catalyst for that magic? And this is now probably 8 or 9 years after the actual walk. I've been working on this, on and off for years. And I was in Kathmandu, and a friend of mine there who was an editor, she said, well, let me take a read of the book and we can talk about it and see if I can give any advice or help. And a few days later, she called me back and said, okay, well, let's have dinner and chat about this. And we went out to dinner, and she came and she had 10 pages of notes, and I was thinking, wow, that's fantastic. She's really read the text closely, which is of course what you want of an editor. And then then it turned out that those 10 pages of notes were on the first few pages of the book. So she had read the book very intently. And I thought, wow, this is going to be a very long conversation. And it was. But when we break it down, what she was saying was that, this is an incredible story. But she thought there was something else going on in the background that I hadn't tapped into. And then a few days later, I was in my hotel room in Kathmandu, and I was actually working on that section where I reach the source of Ganga at Galmuk. And I do quite a bit of meditation around my writing time to clear my head and to prepare myself for the next section that I'll be working on. And I'd come out of this meditation after reading that section, and I had this overwhelming sense of deja vu. I had been there before. I had been to that place before. I'd somehow been there to Galmuk. And then I felt, no, I hadn't been there exactly, but there was something about the light, that half light that you get just as the sun is starting to set. And there was that particular cool air that you get coming off a glacier. And it was completely still. It was 4,500 meters up in the Himalayas, and there wasn't a breath of wind. And I was thinking, wow. And then all of a sudden, in a flash, it came back to me. I had been in that situation, in that type of environment before. And it had been when I'd seen my brother's body dead in a hospital morgue in Canada. It took days to find my brother's body at the bottom of that lake, and the Navy divers brought him up, and they brought him to the morgue, and we had to identify him. I'll never forget going there and looking into his face. And he was, a blue-white complexion, but he had the tiniest of smiles on his face, and that was extremely comforting for me. But it was that light that you get in hospitals, that fluorescent light, and the coolness that you have in work, and the complete silence around us that brought me back to Galmuk and to the source. And I realized in this, like a rainbow flash, that of course, this walk and this book, it wasn't just about the Himalayas and me. It wasn't about flora and fauna and meteorology and geology and religion and landscape and spirituality. It was about the personal story, the universal narrative that we all have to overcome in this life, that we all have to accept in this life. And that's the passing of a loved one, and where to find the energy to move on from that. And when I realized that this was actually about overcoming grief, I went back, and with so much energy, I went back into the text again. And all of these little moments, so many of these little moments that were magical, interactions with people and landscape and events, actually had relationships back to moments that Gareth and I had spent together. And that's when I realized that the walk really wasn't about me as a young guy, fit and full of ego, being the first person to walk across the Himalayas alone. It was really about, again, that universal narrative that we all have to face in this life, about coming to terms with the death of a loved one.
That's beautiful, Jono, that's really beautiful and clearly shows in the book as well. It's real. It's vulnerable. Everything that you mentioned, right from grief to compassion to love to faith, right? At the end of the day, it's getting that faith back and overcoming. I think that's all of the emotions and all of the feelings that one gets while going through this book. And I really loved it that you made it so readable and easy. Like at times it does feel, because even the way you've put out the book, the layout of the book, it's almost like a journal. But at the same time, there's so many different layers within, like you mentioned, right? There is that personal nature to it. There is the Himalayas, sometimes in the foreground, sometimes in the background. There's the people, there's the interactions, all of which I think come about beautifully in the book. And really hats off to you for kind of capturing that. And no wonder that it took so many iterations and so many years. What, 12 years, you're saying, by the time the book came out,
Yeah.
right? No wonder. And I'm glad that I could get my hands on the copy of the book. And Jono, one more time, it was a pleasure talking to you, for all the beautiful moments that you kind of touched upon during the conversation. These beautiful moments that I experienced while reading the book over the past couple of weeks. And for all the magic, I guess, that's all I could say, for having us, or giving us an opportunity to kind of feel that magic as you weaved your way through the Himalayas, right from Pakistan to India. Thank you so much, Jono. It was a pleasure having you on the podcast.
Saif, it's been a great pleasure chatting with you today. And it's just, again, it's great to connect with all my friends in India. And I'm just so happy that the book is out in India and that people are, again, engaging with this story. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jono. That was yet another great episode of the Musafir Stories. If you guys like the show, please subscribe to us on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, Savan, Pocket Casts, Castbox, Stitcher, or any other podcasting app available on iOS or Android. Please do leave us a review on iTunes. It goes a long way in the show's discoverability. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. We go by the handle The Musafir Stories. Or, if it suits you, you could email us at themusafirstories@gmail.com or visit our website at www.themusafirstories.com for more information. All of these links will be made available in the show notes section of each episode. So here's to more traveling, sharing, and inspiring. Stay tuned for our next episode. Until then, happy travels and goodbye.